Today on Cloud Concepts, we will learn what is the cloud. Before we begin, let's start with a brief introduction. Hello, my name is Chris, and welcome to the channel, Cloud Concepts. The goal of this session is to teach about the underlying technologies of the cloud so you better understand the concepts. I learn best when I know how it was built. I hope this approach gives you a different perspective to learning. Please help the channel grow by liking, subscribing, and sharing the content. Thank you. Before we talk about the cloud, let's understand the components behind the scenes. We need to talk about data centers, the hardware resources within the data centers, specifically a rack server, hypervisors and virtual machines, and finally the control plane and its interfaces. Let's start off with the data center. It's a centralized IT operations hub. So that means it's a big warehouse building. It's got backup generators, cooling systems, high-speed internet, security and surveillance. All the resources are contained in this one location. It can also have people, like technicians, that maintain the resources. Now let's look inside the data center some more. Let's look at the equipment. Inside a data center, you're going to find our hardware resources, such as our routers, switches, firewalls, networking cables, power cables, and then ventilation systems as this hardware heats up. We'll have server racks and then rack servers that go into those racks. Let's talk about rack servers. It's a low-profile computer that's stackable. We put them in racks, and therefore it's called a rack server. So generally the lowest profile servers are around 1.5 inches tall. It's about 18 inches wide and it's about 28 inches deep. These are standard sizes. And why they make them this size is so that you can stack them in these racks. And you can get up to 42 servers in a rack. So you can imagine the compute that you can have in this one location. That's pretty tall. Moving forward, we look into how this computer is made. So in part 2, you'll see that there are multiple hard drive bays. And what this means is this computer has access to a lot of hard drive space. It can be hard drives like spinning disks, or it can be solid state drives. And generally, you can get a lot of space, up to 160 terabytes, depending on your configuration. We move on to the cooling system. These powerful cooling fan systems pull air from the front of the server all the way through and push them through the back, which cools the components down. Moving forward, we have multiple memory slots. In this configuration, there's about 12 memory slots that we can put RAM into. And with this type of configuration, you could get upwards up to 2 terabytes of RAM on this one computer. Think of the power you're getting. You'll notice beside the RAM, there are these 2 heat sinks. So generally, CPUs have heat sinks on top of them to help dissipate the heat. And therefore, those powerful fans will blow away the heat through the back of the server. But underneath these heat sinks, you have these multiple core CPUs, central processing units. And these central processing units could have upwards up to 256 cores on each unit. And there's 2 in this one specific machine. Some machines have 4, some machines have 8. So you can see the power of these servers. Continuing back into the server, you'll notice that the server has 2 power units. This means if there's a failure in one of the units, the other one will automatically kick in, or it's evenly distributed normally, and then if one fails, the other one takes over the weight of the server. This means that the server will not go down that quickly. It will have a backup. Additionally, we have PCI slots in the back of the server, which allows us to add additional network cards or NICs or GPUs like graphical processing units to give it more functionality for the server. So you can understand this server is super, super powerful. what would you do with all this power? Well, we have a tool called a hypervisor. And the hypervisor is a software that allows you to create virtual computers, or also known as virtual machines, by allocating elements of this big host server. So that rack server, for example. Virtual machines are allocated CPU, memory, storage, GPUs, etc. from the host server. It can even have its own IP address. You can see in this depiction here, this is what we call a type 1 hypervisor. There is a type 2, but we won't cover it in this course, as it's primarily used for development purposes. You can see how this host server, this big rack server that we had, is divided into smaller machines, and these machines will have its own operating system like Windows, Linux, Mac, Ubuntu, whatever your flavor is. So how do we control these hypervisors? Because like I said, we have multiple rack servers in a rack, and then the data center could have multiple racks on the floor. So we've got several servers that we have to communicate with to create virtual machines if we need a server. Well, this is where the control plane comes into play. It's the top level service to help orchestrate, manage, and monitor your resources in your data center. It manages hypervisors and other software-defined environments like network, storage, and security. Other things can be virtualized. How do we interact with the control plane? Well, there are three primary interfaces that we have. We have a web interface, which is like your management console. We have a CLI, which is also known as a command line interface. These two are primarily used for human interaction. So if you and I just wanted to create something, we could do that. Now, there's another type of interface, which is called the SDK, or Software Development Kit, or the API, which is the Application Programming Interface. This is a great tool if you want to connect this to some type of software application. So this is also known as the application interface. So if we continue forward, let's do a quick recap of what we just learned. So a data center has all of our hardware resources centralized. So like our servers or network cables, everything to kind of make your applications function. The rack server is where applications would reside on, right? But this is a physical, we're talking in the physical realm. So if I needed to install something on the server, I would need to have access. And then the server is way too overpowered for what I need. Now we come into the hypervisor. The hypervisor and the virtual machines allow us to take this large overpowered machine and divide it up like a pizza into components that we can use in smaller machines. So I don't need a large server to have a web server on. So I'm going to have a virtual machine with 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and 60 gigs of hard drive space. And now I've divided up my big resources into smaller usable resources. But the key here is now it's interactable by software. So I don't necessarily have to physically go into the location and set up this configuration. I can do it via software. If I wanted to control more hypervisors in the entire data center and let someone decide which rack server is going to get my server and where maybe some other database server is going to reside to help me keep the data center more optimally running, to reduce network traffic, etc., then I want to use the control plane, which allows me to give access to my user base, most likely my internal technicians, access to be able to do configurations and setups for my application. So we have a control plane that has an interfaces with web interfaces, command line interfaces where you can just type in code and it can create virtual machines, or the SDK, Software Development Kit, and your API, which you give access to your software. So your software can interact with your control plane and set up your resources. So what does this configuration actually describe? Well, if this is your data center for your business, this is technically what we call the private cloud, because it's specifically for you and your users, your technicians, people that work within your company that need access to these resources, like your developers. This would be the private cloud. So let's learn about the cloud. What is the cloud? Well, the cloud, also known as the public cloud, is a third-party provider that allows us to create, manage, and monitor computing resources with a pay-as-you-go model in their own data centers. So that means instead of what I just described, we own the data center, we're handing over those duties to another provider, a third-party provider, and they run all that equipment for us, and they allow us to access it through their control plane. So why would we do this? So we can focus on running our business and not managing our IT infrastructure. Are we a business or are we an IT company? Let's discuss who the public cloud providers are, or also known as the cloud providers. We have AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. They have over 100 data centers globally in 31 different regions around the world. We have Microsoft Azure, which has over 200 data centers globally in 60 regions around the world. Then we also have Google Cloud, which has 118 data centers globally in 39 regions around the world. These are the three major players in the cloud space. We also have some other players, which is IBM, Alibaba, Oracle, Red Hat, DigitalOcean, and Rackspace. They will provide you the resources that you need to get up and running. Time for a quick quiz. Please put your answers in the comments below. Question number 1. What software creates virtual machines? Question number 2. What are 2 different ways to interface with the control plane? Question number 3. Name one single cloud provider. If you have suggestions for new topics, put them in the comments below. Thank you.